кожен з вас формувався, виховувався на певній культурній епосі, на певній музиці. Всі ви слухаєте про музику, там, не знаю, Сану Білозір, ще якісь речі. І коли Богдан приїхав і розповів, каже, що я хочу, щоб приїхав до нас Тоні Палмер, хто це Тоні Палмер? Тоні Палмер, так? І він довідку на нього таку зробив, і я коли читав довідку, в мене такий трепет з'явився. Тобто я собі уявив, що до студентів приїде людина, яка особисто знала, спілкувалася з Джоном Ленноном і фактично з всіма представниками західної рок-музики, яку і я, і ви всі слухали. Так? Тобто, у моєму розумінні, професійне портфоліо Тоні Палмера і його життєвий досвід – це можливість поспілкуватися з людиною, яка була дотична до історії культури, музики другої половини ХХ століття. І це дуже і дуже є круто. Так? Тобто не читати в книжках, не щось собі уявляти, щось слухати, а просто мати можливість поговорити з людиною, яка була всередині всіх тих процесів. Я не говорю про професійні здобутки Тоні Палмера, вони є надзвичайними, вони є унікальними, і зрештою ви це можете собі погуглити і побачити. Так? Тому ми зараз працюємо в такому режимі, невеличкий вступ від Тоні, спільний перегляд фільму і потім обговорення, плюс-мінус в рамках тієї теми, яку ми декларували. І Тоні щось готував, але він швидше хотів почути вашу реакцію, вашу рефлексію, ваші запитання про те, що вас цікавить. Тому будьте активні, бо ми маємо часу тільки до 10-15 по-перше. Далі ми мусимо їхати в аеропорт, бо Тоні летить вдома. Окей? Тобто я думаю, що це є достатньо для певного початку. Тоді прошу вітати Тоні Палмера.
Добрий день. That's my 2 words of Ukrainian. I'm very ashamed that I've come here so many times now. I first came to the Ukraine in 1981. I've been coming not every year, but very often. You all speak perfect English?
We hope so.
Wonderful. Igor was very nice to tell you that I had somehow suffered through the 1960s in England, in both England and the United States. Yesterday, I was in Ustalu because I knew Stravinsky and I helped to restore the house in where Stravinsky lived. And as I was just telling my guide that but one thing I've learned about coming to Ukraine is that they will send you, whoever's inviting, they'll send you a list of subjects that they are going to talk about. Then you arrive and you find that actually the list is something completely different. So you can come completely unprepared. And the thing that shocked me yesterday was in Ustalu they had invited 2 very distinguished Ukrainian composers of a certain age, I mean 60s, 70s. And of course what they talked about was the extent to which the music that they had written in the 1960s, these are classical musicians, the music that they had written in the 1960s and the 1970s, they had either found it impossible to perform, or if they performed it, they were fired from whichever institution they were at. I mean, you know the story. And I was shocked again, because it's something that I'm aware of, I know happened. I made a huge film about Shostakovich, so I know exactly what the story was. It is still, for me, in 2018, very shocking to come and hear first-hand accounts of what happened to these people. And of course, what it reminds me of is the extent to which their generation, less so now, their generation was completely cut off from what was happening in, if I call the West, you know what I mean, outside, beyond the Soviet system. And I still find that shocking. I also find it absolutely shocking that, this is anti-British now, that I can come to Lviv airport with my passport and say, hello, they open it, yes, yes. I mean, how they can tell that's me is beyond me. But anyway, they look at it and stamp it, and I'm here. You can't do the same coming to England. That's a disgrace. I argue over and over again with the British authorities. I'm always inviting people. It's terrible that these borders exist. But we know these borders exist, but we have to fight against them. You on your side, me on my side. This was really also the case with music, because not just classical music, but I was invited, I think, in 1992 to go to the first music festival in Sofia in Bulgaria. And I began to talk about all the people that I had worked with, like The Who and Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen and so on and so on. And I realized that they had never heard them. They'd heard them on the radio, maybe, but they didn't have any first-hand experience of them. And I found that absolutely shocking. So I'm here really to break down whatever borders I can. That's the most important thing I can do. So after we've looked at the film, I'll tell you a bit about the film now. Please ask me questions. Don't do as the last time I was here. I gave a talk about something, I can't remember what it was. So I said, questions? For about 10 minutes. Fine, I have a cup of coffee. John Lennon was not responsible for this film, but he was the instigator of this film. I was at a university called Cambridge, which I'm sure you know of, and I was studying and about to start teaching logic. That was my subject. I had no plans to make films or be involved in the arts at all. I thought I was going to be a nice, quiet, simple academic. That was my plan. Unfortunately, I met the Beatles in October 1963. None of you were born. In October 1963, came to give a concert. And I went representing the university newspaper, just to report on the press conference. So I went in the morning, and there was this press conference, and there were the four Beatles. Now, you've seen film of what Beatles press conferences were like. They were mostly very silly. And so it was a quite short press conference. And afterwards, we're all standing around drinking cups of tea, because we're just drinking cups of tea. And this man came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "You didn't ask any questions." And I said, "No, why not?" "Well, I thought it was very silly." And he said, "Yes, it was very silly." And it was John Lennon, of course. And then he said, would I show him around Cambridge University? Now, Cambridge University, I'm sure you know, is lots of little colleges. They're all quite close together, but it's not one campus, it's lots of them. Now, even more lots of them, but in those days, lots of them. So I said, I'm not going to show you around because we'll be mobbed, or you'll be mobbed, and that's not my idea of fun. And he said, all right, I'll come in disguise. Okay, so I go to pick him up at the hotel, and there's John Lennon in a very, very silly hat, in a beard down to here, and a big, old, dirty brown Macintosh. I mean, it looked ridiculous. He laughed, I laughed, got rid of the disguise. So I was able to show him little bits of Cambridge. And the one really interesting thing was that I took him to a library which was built by the great English architect Sir Christopher Wren. It's called the Wren Library, and it's in Trinity College. And I couldn't get him away. I mean, having got him in there, I couldn't drag him out. And of course, it occurred to me later that the main reason was he always felt that he lacked an education. I mean, he was a very intelligent man, but he lacked an education. So now he's in one of the most famous libraries in Cambridge, and he just wanted to stay there. He didn't want to go and play concert in the evening at all. Anyway, eventually he went, and as he left, he put a telephone number and said, when you come to London, call me. I said, I'm not coming to London. I'm a nice, simple academic from Cambridge. Of course, a few years later, I did go to London. I still had the bit of paper. Now, in 1963, the Beatles were famous. They had one or two #1 hits, but not as famous as they became. So now I come to London in 1966, and by this time they're intergalactically famous. But I still have the piece of paper, so I thought, I'll telephone. Telephone. To my amazement, the phone still worked. And a lady answered the phone, and you could tell from the sound of her voice that I was the 400th person who telephoned that morning and said, John Lennon said to call. Another idiot. So I said, well, he did, never mind, this is my number, and put the phone down, thinking I'd never hear another film. 30 minutes later, a man called Derek Taylor, who was their publicist, telephoned and said, I have a message for you from John. And I'm thinking, God, I mean, I was near shaking now. And I kept thinking, what would the message be? Who is this idiot? You know, leave me alone, go and do something, anything. So eventually, nervously, I said, and what is the message? And the message from John was, why has it taken you 3 years to call me back? So he then said he'd like to have lunch. So lunch with John Lennon was difficult because first course was brown rice, second course brown rice, and the dessert brown rice, so a lot of brown rice. But in the course of the lunch, he said, I was now working at the BBC, he said there are many great musicians who either cannot get onto the BBC or do not want to appear on the BBC, because most pop music shows consisted of, and if you're the camera, Jimi Hendrix somewhere in the distance over there, and here, between Jimi Hendrix and the camera, lots of very beautiful, like you lot, lots of very beautiful girls doing this. Jimi Hendrix somewhere over there. That's completely mad when you think about it. That was why they wouldn't appear on that kind of television show. So John said, I had a duty, a responsibility to make something to get them onto television. So I said, fine, who? And then he made a list. And I said, well, I know who these people are, but I don't know them. He said, I will make the telephone call, and I will tell them they're going to appear in your film, but you've got to make the film. The Who, Cream, Jimi Hendrix, as I mentioned, Eric Burdon, Beatles, of course, Animals, and who else? Pink Floyd. Now, Pink Floyd, I was in common because I was at school with Roger Waters, as he constantly tells me. Interestingly enough, the other person Roger and I, and a third person, you'll never guess who the third person was, Olivia Newton-John, as in Greece. We were all at school together. We used to have reunions. Anyway, John said, you've got to get these people into a film, and what is really important, and you know a little bit about John Lennon, what is really important is that you show the social context in which these people are. Because he said people do not believe, reading pop newspapers, that these people are intelligent, they are articulate, and they have something to say. And they have something to say about the world in which they live. That was the really important line. They want to tell the audience something about the world in which they live. Now, of course, we're talking about 1967, 68, which, of course, is the time of the Vietnam War, among other things, but the time of the Vietnam War. So he thought it was really important to make a film which demonstrated that these people were not just happy little songwriters, but they were talking about something which we should pay attention to. So we made the film. BBC absolutely hated it. They wouldn't show it for about 9 months. And eventually, by some chance, which is not relevant, it was eventually shown. And it's been shown 20 times since. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And John Lennon was of the view, actually McCartney was of the view, that this had changed as far as England was concerned, and later on the United States, that this had changed forever what people thought about pop music. Now, I would never make that claim, and I'm telling you that's what McCartney said, so I don't know whether it's true or not, but I would never make that claim. But it certainly had an enormous impact, as you will see. And immediately before the film was shown, John and I, more brown rice, and he said, I'm going to make you a bet. The bet was £5. The bastard has never paid me. Remember that, Mr. Lennon, wherever you are, you still owe me £5. He said that, I said that the serious newspapers would hate the film because they would think it's pretentious rubbish. You know, it's making claims for this music and claims for these people which are totally unjustified. And the popular papers, you know, the red tops we call them, you know, the cheap papers, they'll love it because finally all their heroes are on television. And John, was a long pause, I bet you £5, in which he said, you're wrong, it'll be the other way. The popular newspapers will absolutely hate it because they won't understand a word of it. The serious newspapers will take it seriously, even if they don't understand it either. And the last time it was shown in England, it was at the film festival earlier this year, the Guardian newspaper, which is the most serious of the newspapers, there was two pages about the meaning of this film. I mean, I always read this and try to figure out, well, maybe they know more than me, if you see what I mean. I read these very interesting essays, fascinating. So I'd be interested to know what you think the film is about. And there's a prize, which is the Wizz Air fare to London, since you were talking about Wizz Air. You tell me what the last 5 minutes are about of this film that we're about to show, because I think I know now what I meant to say, but I'd be very interested to hear what you think I'm saying, not in the whole film, but particularly the last 5 minutes. The film is very violent, hang on to your seats, and luckily it's short, relatively short. That's all I'm going to say by way of introduction. I beg you, ask me questions afterwards, otherwise I'll just have to tell one silly story after another and keep going until it's time to go to the play, which is not my idea of fun. That's not why I came. I came to learn from you, and I hope you'll find the film interesting. Okay, so we turn the lights out and start. And I normally edit films very, very quickly. I mean, since then, if I've got a 2-hour film, I can edit it in 2 weeks. I mean, it's certainly very quick. This film, my second film, I thought it's easy, and after 12 weeks, I couldn't make any sense. I knew I had extraordinary material, but I couldn't make any sense of it at all. So the editor, very wisely said, tea break, take a week off, go and sit on the beach, don't think about it, then we'll have another go. And the date is very important. It was May 1968. And just opened at the cinema in central London was the film 2001 by Stanley Kubrick, who I later on knew extremely well, got to know extremely well. I went to the afternoon screening of one particular day, and I went to the evening screening. The following day, I went to the morning and the afternoon and the evening. In 4 days, I saw it 12 times. And the thing that amazed me was nobody says a word for 32 minutes. You've all seen the film, everybody's seen 2001. Nobody says a word for 32 minutes. But you, in the audience, you don't get lost. You can follow what the story is. And Stanley Kubrick is relying entirely upon music and images to tell the story. And it was a moment, since we're in the Catholic University, it was my Damascene moment, my moment on the road to Damascus, because I suddenly realized that you could tell a story with images and music alone. You didn't need to explain it. It made its own justification, own explanation. And I came back and we started to edit it again. And what you've just seen, we started from scratch and it was edited in 8 days exactly. Because it was absolutely clear to me what I needed to do. And what I needed to do was to tell the story through music and images. And also, since I wanted to annoy people, is to upset them. So constantly, when they thought they were settling down in one particular narrative, they were off somewhere else. And I've always done that ever since in filming. It's very important in filmmaking. That's a kind of, I'm not comparing myself in any way whatsoever, but that's exactly what Stanley Kubrick does. I mean, you're going down one way, and suddenly you're going down here, and then you're suddenly going down here. But you don't get lost. You rely on the power of the music and the power of the images, and to some extent the words that you're being told. I mean, in 2001, the dialogue is in 3 pages. I'm not comparing myself with Stanley Kubrick, trust me. But, I mean, they are, that was a really important lesson to me in trying to edit a film, and trying to tell something that the audience wasn't expecting. I mean, however bad that film is, you didn't hear it properly this morning. I wish I could have heard it. But does it look like an MTV music show? No. Exactly. And to some extent, therefore, the film is a failure, because when it was first broadcast, first time in 1968, of course, it changed everything. Suddenly, there was whole people, I'm not talking about people imitating it, but suddenly, you know, pop music meant something more than, I love. Second question.
No, it was actually the sidewalk, and now I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so it felt like you were actually in a pretty good relationships with the people you took interview from. Like they felt open to you. They weren't like playing anything out of themselves. So my question is, first, how do you even get access? And second of all, how do you not become one of just random journalists who they see every day? Like, how do you connect with them on a deeper level that they want to talk to you about deeper stuff?
Well, the important thing is don't pay them. Don't offer them money or a contract. You go to talk to them as a friend. And again, it's impossible to think back that far, but I mean, at the end, the time we made that film in 1967, you know, the average, I'm sure you as journalists are much superior, but the average journalist would go along and say, tell us about why have you got your hair that long? You know, why are you wearing orange, funny coloured clothes or a very artistic shirt? Now, tell us about your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whoever it is. That's all journalists ask, essentially. And I came along and said, can you tell me what you're trying, can you explain to me what it is you're trying to tell me? Well, we want to change the world. What do you mean you want to change the world? How do you want to change the world? In what way you want to change the world? And one thing I learned over the years, I mean, I made far too many films, I think about 120 now. But the one thing about interviews, this one piece of information, lesson, advice I can give you. If you go for an interview, do not go with a clipboard in which there are 7 questions. Go with one really silly question at the top, and then listen to what they say. Because what they say is what they want to tell you, and then you can say, now wait a second, what do you mean by that? I mean, blah, 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 and so on. And then you're away. And then it's a conversation, not an interview. And then what did you do? And then where did you go? Well, it's not interesting. What is interesting, and people will tell you, if you're just listening as a friend, not as a clipboard thing. And I mean, the most extraordinary example, I just give you one extraordinary example that happened to me. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes I'm asked, you know, can you send the questions in advance? To which the answer is no. Why not? I've no idea what the questions are, except the first silly question. Usually my opening line is, there's so much I'd like to ask you, I don't really know where to start. So they're helping you immediately. Okay. The one person who did ask for the questions in advance, so I thought, well, actually, I will, on this occasion, do it, was Nelson Mandela. And we made a film about the great South African playwright called Athol Fugard, who was a friend of Nelson Mandela's. And I mean, this is about 10, 12 years ago now. And I said to Athol, do you think you could persuade Nelson Mandela to be interviewed? And I wouldn't dare ask him. Athol said, yes, I'll ask him. And back came the reply, yes. Then came the question, could you send us the questions? So for once, I thought, Nelson Mandela, I must send the questions. So I sent the questions, 3 questions. What was it like on the island, on Robben Island? How did, and so on, you know, stupid questions they were. But anyway. And then when I arrived to interview him, I realized why he'd asked for the questions. Because he was now obviously very old, very frail, and sick. I mean, he was very sick. I was amazed that he agreed. He was sort of sitting in a chair like Buddha, like this. And so you're the camera, and then here's Nelson Mandela, you're me. Much prettier version of me. And up here is what was called idiot boards, you know, where he'd written out the answers. Because he thought that because he loved Athol Fugard, he thought it was really important to get the answers accurately. So he'd written out the answers. So I asked him the first stupid question, what was it like on Robben Island? And I won't do his voice, but I mean it was, and he looks up to the idiot board, and he starts to read the answer. And he gets to the end of the first line, and then he stopped. And I thought, oh, maybe his eyesight's gone, or he's feeling even sicker now. But he just stopped. So I didn't know what to do. I thought, do I ask him something else, or what do I do? So I thought, I'll wait. Always wait. Never try to interrupt him. And then he turned, no, you're the camera, aren't you? Yes, and you're me. He looked at me, and then he looked at the camera, and then he looked back at me and he said, I'll tell you what happened. I'm looking at the idiot board, I don't see that up there. He said, we were on the boat going over to Robben Island, and the guard said to me, oh, don't worry, he said, you'll be here for about 5 years, and then we was there for 25 years. But you'll be there for 5 years, and then you'll come back, and you'll be a hero, and you'll be surrounded by beautiful girls. And then there was a long pause, and then he looked straight, you're the camera, you know, he looked straight at the camera, and he leaned in, he said, I'll tell you, and he kept doing this, he said, I'll tell you, I'm still looking for the beautiful girls. And that was a wonderful moment about, told you everything you needed to know about Nelson Mandela, none of my stupid questions, or the Indian court. Then he laughed, and then we began a conversation. So you never know. But what you mustn't do is arrive with a clipboard, journalists, with a series of questions. You listen to the first answer, and that will take you away, always. But you have, I mean, all those guys in that film, without exception, either were friends or they became friends soon afterwards. And the ones, the few who are still alive, I'm still very friendly with. Pete Townsend I see every 2 months. Jack Bruce sadly is dead. I'm going to Ginger Baker's, it feels like the drummer, feels like 100th birthday in 2 weeks' time. So, you know, they're friends. I mean, that's why they also rather strangely trust me. But they trust me. I've never betrayed them. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been asked, begged by every journalist you've ever heard of, you know, can you tell us what Paul McCartney was really like? Can you tell us what John Lennon was really like? You know, I've got letter after letter from John Lennon, and letter after letter and telegrams and all kinds of things from Paul McCartney. I've never talked about it. You know, because we had a relationship, and that's that. It's private.
But you didn't really answer my question.
No, good.
Like, what is? See, you said about the journalists that are calling you and like asking you so many questions. How are you different from them? How could you build those relationships and they couldn't? What is different in your, you know, way of dealing with those superstars?
I mean, I can't answer that question. I mean, I'm me, and I always go in as me, and they know me. I think they instinctively feel they can trust me, and they instinctively feel I will not betray any confidences that they give me. And I mean, there's no way to teach you how to feel that, but that is what you have to do. You have to bring them to you, not stick a microphone in front of their nose and say, tell us about it. Do that. It's just a confidence, yes.
I'm Anya Denisenko, first course. So can you tell us what the Lennonists do really like? Okay, no, my questions actually will be about, can you tell, maybe you understand why for Lennon was important to show this scene, to show this culture, why he wanted to put the underground music on television?
Well, that's a good question. But I mean, he never thought of it as underground music. No, he never thought. I mean, I've made lots and lots of films about the different kinds of musicians, and about ballet dancers, and about painters, and about sculptors, and about poets, and about playwrights. What I'm interested in is people. For example, I will answer your question. That was going around trying to find a way to do it. I made a film with and about Maria Callas, a great singer. Okay. Now, if you wanted me to describe that film, I would say this is not a film about a great opera singer. Oh, and by the way, she's a woman in a hell of a mess. This is a film about a woman who's in a hell of a mess. Oh, and by the way, she's an opera singer. Do you see what I mean? What I'm interested in is people. And I'm interested in people who display courage. Artistic courage, moral courage, philosophical courage, physical courage. You know, all the people I've made films about have that quality. For example, I made a film with the great dancer Margot Fonteyn. And Margot said at one point, was trying to define what it was like to be on tour. You know, as a touring ballet, great ballet dancer. And she said, I go to theatres that I don't know. It's wood, perhaps, Wood has nails sticking out of it. Wood, the stage has to be properly cleaned and dusted. I trust them to do this. Now I'm standing on the side of the stage, my music is playing, and I'm coming up to the moment where I have to get on stage. She said, I make my big leap, and for example, my foot lands on a nail, or I slip, my career is finished. So that one moment, that single moment, is an extraordinary act of courage. That's physical courage. I mean, I can go on about the notion of courage. Now, therefore, the really important thing when you're considering a subject to make a film about is, why am I interested in this? I made a big film about Shostakovich, for example. Now, I know all about, as I mentioned earlier, I know all about, not all about, but I know enough about how Shostakovich suffered under the Soviet regime. But what I was interested in was the man Shostakovich. How the hell did he cope with that? Music takes care of itself, but how did the man cope with it? How did he survive? What did he have to do in order to survive? So it's always people. And those people, on the whole, also display artistic courage. They go where we can't. Can't because we don't know how to. They take us in a direction that we don't know, that we don't understand. But they somehow have seen it. They've seen the vision and they're going for it. And we're following along behind them, you know, like little children following behind them. So those people are extraordinary. I made a film once about a football player. Our only English captain who won the World Cup. In 100 years, we've won the World Cup once. He was a guy called Bobby Moore. Bobby Moore. And Bobby Moore was, I knew one little thing about Bobby Moore. I like football, Liverpool Football Club, but I like football. But I knew one thing about Bobby Moore, that when he captained England in 1966 in the World Cup, he'd already been diagnosed with cancer. Nobody knew. His wife knew. Alf Ramsey, who was the manager, knew, and obviously he knew. And he'd been ordered, not requested, ordered by the doctors not to play. If you play, you'll kill yourself. I'm the captain of England. I'm going to play. That's physical courage. Okay. So I'm now making a film about this man, and we interviewed most of the other players. And I'll never forget one particular player, you might have heard of him, he's called Jack Charlton. He was the sort of centre of the park, as they say now. Jack Charlton, wonderful man, very tall, thin. And I like to interview people by windows, so that the natural light is coming in. I hate any kind of artificial light, but if I can get them to a window, artificial light. And I'm asking him dumb, stupid questions about Bobby Moore. And suddenly, in mid-sentence, he stopped. And he looked out of the window and he said very slowly, he said, you know, the thing about Bobby Moore is that he was one of us, part of the team. He didn't say that, but he said, he was one of us. Then he slowly turned around and looked back at the camera and said, but he wasn't like us. In other words, there was a special quality to him, which is why they followed him, why he was such a great captain. And I mean, that's true of all great creative artists that I've ever had to deal with, including this mob. You know, there's something strange about them. There's something special. They are different from us. And therefore, you have to be very careful with them.
So the Lennon wants to show the people like what they were like a people, like what they were like just human beings.
Yes, he wanted me to make it clear that the people who played, who were in this film, they were not just great instrumentalists. You can't really, you couldn't hear, but you just occasionally see Eric Clapton, wonderful guitarist, and Ginger Baker, of course. They were great instrumentalists, but the length of their hair, or the amount of drugs they took, or the amount of girlfriends they had, like Hendrix, is irrelevant. As Hendrix, the summary of that little Hendrix sequence is absolutely on the money, as we would say, where he says, you know, I can't express myself in words. That's not true, he was very good with words, but he says, I can't express myself in words, but when I'm on the stage, that's my whole life. That's the kind of person I am. So I'm filming someone who knows that when he's on stage, that's him, not person in the interview. Is that half an answer?
Half. I will want some more. Answer. Ask.
Yes.
on my first year. So the question is about your work and about how do you deal with such a thing like all the characters, all these personalities of the artists, they are very deep, they are very complicated. Sometimes there are some bad things. And how do you deal with that, to show the whole picture, just not to be wrong and to demonstrate it very properly?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, now, when I'm so old, they know the kind of film I'm going to make. So if they agree to have a film made, they can expect trouble. You see what I mean? But at the beginning of my career, that was also to some extent true. Because, I mean, that's film number 2. Now, anybody seeing film number 2 is not going to expect me to make a nice, happy little sunny film about whatever. They know there's something going to happen. So, in a way, it's easy. It has become easy, that level, it has become easier for me. But I'm constantly also fascinated by, for example, I made worked several times with and made a big film with Richard Burton. Richard Burton was an amazing actor with an amazing voice. And huge film about Wagner. We had him for 156 days non-stop. I mean, that's in 7 months. That's an enormous amount of time. And with any big film, like the Wagner film was a big film, you know, there's moments where nothing's happening, nothing appears to be happening. Got to move all the equipment over here, got to move this, whatever it is. So I said to Richard early on, what we must do is that to stop you getting bored, and therefore maybe drinking, except he didn't drink very much, hardly at all, is I will interview you. How about that? Oh, good idea, he said. I've always wanted to be interviewed, dying bastard. You always want to be interviewed. And in almost the first interview, we interviewed him in his dressing room. He said, he's looking into the mirror, and we're filming him into the mirror. He says, you know, I don't understand why people are fascinated by me. I mean, my nose is like that, you know, my mouth is like this, my eyes are like that, my eyebrows are terrible, my hair's a mess, I've got pop marks all over the place. Quite a good voice, but I don't hear it, of course. Why are they interested in me? And then he said, and I know several other people like that. Clint Eastwood was one he mentioned, and later on I did talk to Clint Eastwood about this very thing, said exactly the same thing. Right. So you could say that's just vanity. He doesn't like the way he looks. Now, I think I can say with relative certainty, when you get up in the morning, any of you, you look in the mirror, you think, I'm going straight back to bed, it's a horrible sight. You see what I mean? You ladies are lucky, you can put makeup on. I can't put, I just comb my hair, try to anyway. Richard Burton famously never ever saw himself on the screen. He couldn't bear it. He never went to see a single one of his films, ever. And if there was an awards ceremony where they were going to show an extract of all the Oscars and so on, they were going to show an extract of them, he'd go to the lavatory at that point. I mean, he hated seeing himself. And you could say, well, that's vanity, but also it was a fear that the real person was not the person that people imagine to be. So it's a complicated equation that they make between being a great performer and knowing how their performance is perceived, is seen by other people. I think that's a three-quarter answer.
Yes, I continue. How do you start? How do you start this
Process?
This process, yes.
Desperation. Absolute desperation. I don't know. I've no idea. I mean, I don't know. I meet somebody, I talk to somebody, I'm aware of somebody, and I think there's something strange about this person, something special. Something special. And so I'm attracted. I go bees to the honey. And then we start to work it out. Let's take that lady over there.
First of all, thank you for this screening. I think you don't need to be upset of the sound because we were raised of this, like the results of this culture, this time period, so we pretty well know how it should sound. But also, have a question, as I think that this movie is as experimental as the music you were talking about in this music in this movie, but still you showed these moments of violence so explicitly, like throwing them to the face of the viewers, and maybe continuing your career and observing what's going on now in cultural sphere, in art sphere, you observe that the tendency of showing violence, of showing these like hard moments had changed, and now it's like not a proper way to talk about that, and it can be like, have you ever thought that if you would make this movie right now, you could show this cruelty in some other way, or you're still satisfied with it? I'm just interested in your reflection on the way, on the approach to this really hard topics.
You can't escape it, I'm afraid. That's what life is. That sounds a cliche, but it's the case. I wanted to make a film, I did make films, about the great Polish composer Górecki. And Górecki lived in Katowice. And Katowice is quite close to Auschwitz, as you know. And I went to discuss with him what we would do. It was based around the Third Symphony. It was really a film about the Third Symphony, but really about him and how he'd become a non-person. Polish government banned his music. His music was not allowed to be performed. Third Symphony was banned, and then became a worldwide success after Poland became freer, not free. And he said, we must go to Auschwitz. Why? He said, well, I have some, he's not Jewish and he was never there in the camp. But he said, I have some stories to tell about Auschwitz, which affected me, as they would affect anybody. And that is what is in the music. The music is in 3 movements, as you know. Sure. Critics described it as 3 movements: slower, slow, slower, slowest. It's a bit unfair, but there's a point there. But there's actually 3 songs. There's a song in each movement. The song in the first movement is about Mary Magdalene looking up at Jesus on the cross, saying, what have you done, my son, as it were. Second movement takes as its cue something that a little girl inscribed on the Gestapo prison in Zakopane, which says, she wrote in Polish, "Don't cry for me, mother." It was presumably she was killed. And the third movement is about an army marching through the countryside, and they kill everybody they can find, including this little boy whose mother says, "Why did you kill my son?" So there's a theme there. So with that in mind, bearing in mind the number of children that have been killed in Auschwitz, I agree, we'll go to Auschwitz. I had been before, but I've never been with a camera. And we went in February, so it was quite empty. He told one little story. He said he'd been taken there as a boy at about 5, I think, when the camp had been liberated by the Russians. And he's walking along this path, like a gravel path. He remembered it as a gravel path, crunch, 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 crunch. And he stopped at one moment, he looked down at the gravel, and he realized it was bones that he was walking across, broken bones that he was walking. And he said, that single moment affected my entire life, affected my music. That's what I've written about. So we're now in Auschwitz, and trying to be as discreet as possible, because of the nature of the place. And he suddenly turned to me and said, now we're going to film in the gas ovens. And I was sweating, and I thought, I can't really do this. And he was very insistent. And in the film, if you see the film, it's called The Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, we're in right by the by the ovens, crematorium, with Górecki. He's not saying anything, you couldn't say anything, but you hear the music. Now you could say that's a peep show. It's not a peep show. No one who's ever seen that film, no one ever does not cry. Cry and cry and cry. Now, if that's my way of telling a contemporary audience of this particular horror, then that's my job, that's my responsibility to show it as it is. I mentioned the film about Adolf Hugot, and Adolf Hugot is famous for many reasons. Well, it's wonderful plays, but it's famous for one interesting reason, that he's a white Afrikaner. He's now 83, 84, white Afrikaner. During the apartheid regime, he wrote against the apartheid regime as a white Afrikaner. He wrote wrote plays attacking the apartheid regime. As a result, his plays were banned, he had his passport taken away, so on and so on, the usual thing, very Soviet style. Now Nelson Mandela comes to power, now we have the ANC, a black government. And Athol looks at this black government and says, you're as worse as the other lot. So he now starts writing plays attacking the ANC, attacking, not Nelson Mandela personally, but attacking the ANC. Passport taken away, plays are banned, so on. Now that, going back to courage, that's an extraordinary act of courage. Now, in order to show that, you have to show what happened in the apartheid regime, what is happening with the ANC. You know, we went and filmed in a big township outside Cape Town, that's called Kalisha, where the conditions were absolutely terrible. I mean, they're getting better now, slowly, but you know, no running water, nothing. I mean, just appalling. Apartheid, we know. Lock them up, shoot them, get rid of them. I'm going to make a film about Athol Fugard and not mention that, not make that the main backbone of the film. I'm going to make a film about Goretzky and not be there in the ovens, appalling though it is. I've always done that. That's necessary. I learned it from this in a way. I thought, yes, I have to follow their advice, and that is John Lennon's advice, and show the world as it is. That's the reason we make films, or the reason I make films, not to make the world seem to lie about the world. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've thought of making a film about Eastern Ukraine, but I've just been told it's so dangerous, don't do it. But I've got an idea, maybe I will one day. It's just important that that's what we do. We stand up, as we would say in English, we stand up and we're counted. Film is not just entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. Pop music is not just entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. But it's about something else, which is why present contemporary pop music is, for the most part, complete rubbish. Not about anything. Look at any MTV music show and ask yourself, what's that about? It's about money, big business. But they weren't interested in money. This lot. Yes.
You've stolen my question.
I've stolen your question.
Yes, I just wanted to ask if you could make a film, like a provocative question, if you'd make a film about contemporary music, because when I watched, I compared a lot how like artists behave in contemporary musicians and set musicians in contemporary pop music.
Yes, no.
And it's so different. I mean, this music is expressive, and they are not like they're okay with their wet and with their emotions showing. And today it's like they're not moving. They're lazy, behaving in the screen. And I want to talk about this, but yes, as soon as I started to talk already before my question, I want to really thank you to showing us how it actually came to this quite widespread opinion of today that this music wasn't just about entertainment, it was about social reality. And
that's what it should be.
Yeah, but yeah.
Should be, but isn't.
Yes, but then it was like that. And I mean, in the 60s, it was really a kind of social and youth protest.
It was the climax. I made a series of films, 17 altogether, about the history of American popular music. When we did it, that was again Lennon's suggestion. When we did it, it's called All You Need Is Love. Good title, that. In fact, it's very funny. When we released the film finally in a beautiful box set about 10, 15 years ago, the American distributor said that we had got to prove that we had permission to use the title All You Need Is Love. And I said, but wait a minute, it's common, everybody says it. I mean, but the American lawyer was very insistent, we've got to prove All You Need Is Love. So we got a copyright lawyer to check. We discovered two interesting things really. The first is that the Beatles themselves had never copyrighted the title All You Need Is Love, or trademarked it, so anybody could use it theoretically. But two people had, interestingly enough. One was a brothel in Amsterdam, which is called All You Need Is Love, and they copyrighted the title. And the other was in Hong Kong, and this group manufactured lacy underwear. They were called all in New Zealand. So the only people who owned the copyright all in New Zealand, Robin and Amsterdam, Lacey Underwear. Right, we made this series of films, 17. The purpose of the series, really, back to John Lennon again, was to show how American music had developed and where it had come from. So, for example, we made a film about the blues. Where had the blues come from? Well, we know really fairly clearly now where the blues had come from. From the South, what was it about? It was expressing the problems that the black man had. Ragtime was a more interesting question. Scott Joplin, ragtime was, he lived in a hut, literally a hut, at the bottom of the garden, and there at the top of the garden was, if I call it the White House, I don't mean Trump Tower, but you know, the big, where the plantation owner lived. And Joplin, we know now, listened to the music he could hear going on in that house, which mostly was string quartets, probably bad string quartets, probably Mendelssohn. There's no worse string quartets than Mendelssohn. And he thought, wait a second, I can do that. I've only got a little upright piano, but I can make the same kind of music. But the same kind of music from the black man's point of view. And that was the beginning of ragtime. Jazz, the same, swing, the same. They all arose out of a particular social background and a particular social need. Finally came together in Elvis Presley, then in rock and roll, and the Beatles more, or Lennon and McCartney more than anybody, and Bob Dylan. I mean, on Monday I gave a lecture in Lutz University about Bob Dylan. The question was, did Bob Dylan deserve the Nobel Prize? And I argued that, of course, he deserved the Nobel Prize. I mean, there's the most important lyric poet of the second half of the 20th century. I mean, there's nobody even remotely equal, except possibly Leonard Cohen, whom I also filmed. But they believed that they had something to say, that they could say it. What they didn't have until I made this film was a platform on which they could say it, because nobody was listening. Because at that time, before this film, pop music was, as I said, Hendrix in the corner, all of you, beautiful ladies in the foreground. So the camera is trying to go around, look through these ladies, Hendrix in the distance. It's insulting. It's insulting to him.
And it's
Like playing with your laptop.
it's like on the way around now, artists have a platform to say.
They do now.
What to say.
They're not saying
actually.
it.
So
Yes,
they
it's
don't
all.
understand the problems.
I don't. We'll start. You and I will start a campaign. Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for your story. Second one, thank you very much that you support Liverpool Football Club.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very
We're not doing
nice.
development.
It's very nice news for me. But, well, first of all, your movie and your story before the movie remind me John Lennon's song "Imagine," no religion, no border, and I suppose the story it's maybe about that, about maybe a bridge between this cruel world, war, violence. On the other hand, we have a society which tries to maybe receive this main message which John Lennon, Hendrix and another one try to tell to the people. I suppose it's very important to say about the background that pirate radio in Britain in 60s, when they try to show that classical music it's not the only way how you can enjoy the world, enjoy your time, and it's like a heritage of this pirate radio. So my question is, when you, as I understood, published this movie in 1976, 80s, like that.
No, this one.
This one.
No, this is 1968.
Okay, sorry.
Filmed in 1966.
Did society in Britain take this message? And maybe right now, how do you think if people will saw the movie one more time, will they take this message again? Thank you.
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the film is shown over and over and over again, both on television and in film festivals around the world. And it always produces a shock, especially when you can hear it properly. For example, I went 4 or 5 years ago. There are these dreadful conventions called Beatle conventions. Don't go, because it's always held in one hotel in America, either in Newark, opposite Newark in New Jersey, or in Chicago, or in Los Angeles. Those 3 places. Oh no, Las Vegas. And 10,000 people arrive, and they're all guitarists, and they're all sitting. So you come out of your hotel room in the morning, and you go across, a bit like over there, you go across 6 people who are all going, yesterday, you know, or some other song. I mean, it's dreadful, dreadful. Anyway, we were asked to take this film and show it. It was a famous film in this way. And their kind of film screening was in a big hall. And it's like many screenings at festivals. People come and, you know, see 5 minutes and go and get your Coca-Cola, come back. So people are talking and coming backwards and forwards all the time. And I went to the film that was shown before this one, and I nearly cancelled the screening because I said, you know, I want, if you're going to show the film, you don't have to come and see it, but if you do see it, please concentrate on it. And I was kind of watching people coming and going, thinking it's going to be a catastrophe. It started, and sure enough, at the beginning, 700, 800 people there. Sure enough, at the beginning, 2 or 3 people got up, but then they came back again, I noticed. But after 5 minutes, nobody moved. And at the end, after 55 minutes, there was absolute silence. And I was amazed. I mean, I was pleased, grateful, but I was just amazed that, so to a 2008 audience, it still hit them very hard. You keep mentioning, not you, collectively, you keep talking about violence. The purpose of the film is not to have violence in there, but the violence is not the justification. But the violence is there simply to remind you this is about the real world in which terrible things have happened. And Pete Townsend, of course, is the other end of the spectrum, and he says, very interestingly at one point, he says, you know, pop music is art. And it's important that we think of it as art, and it's important that it progresses as art. Otherwise, what's the point? Now, that's got forgotten today. Not my fault, but it's been forgotten. But at that particular moment, in the 60s and the early 70s, it was the case. That's what people believed. Donovan at the end says, you know, we want all the artists together. That's where you see the Greek frieze, which is what the Greeks believed. That's what, you know, we're going to change the world. That's what they hoped. Didn't happen, because you have dreadful people like politicians. There's a lady in the corner who's been waving at me for
Hello, my name is Maria. Thank you for the film. I'm sorry, I didn't catch like every word that music critic were saying, because well.
There's only one, the guy at the end.
Yeah, it was not the guy that were musicians or other ones, but still I can feel like this whole harmony of sounds and of picture and words, and for me this film was like a time machine. I felt like a time machine that I can feel myself at that times, and to understand that that film can get more and more new senses with times. Because for example, I understand this energy that I can feel from musicians and from people from music market and from critics is kind of different. I feel like musicians are still, they're like there are people who are out of time. I feel it, there's the modern people by now even, and other people who were not musicians and were there felt like I have a feeling that they're even funny, a little bit funny for me, because they like are here from retro guys, and they're almost left there at the times, and I think that with time this film could bring more and more new senses, and it's maybe right now, because its context is changing, it's not the same film that it was at 1969.
No, you're right. I mean, I'm surprised that people want to go on showing the film. I mean, I'm pleased that people want to go on showing the film, but I think that in a way is the answer to your question. I mean, film festivals around the world, they think this is relevant today because it reminds us of what we should be interested in and what we should be concerned with. But on television, we are not. I mean, it's television films made for television. On television, we're not. We are constantly apologizing for the world as it is. Mm-hmm. Or we use it as a peep show. And that's unforgivable. But since you're talking about meaning, nobody's told me what the last 10 minutes was, which remember, I offered a prize, Wizz Air.
For me, it was like quite clear for what youth is standing, like what for and what against for. So it was like,
Well,
like
me
just,
personally, you mean?
I mean the last 5 minutes.
Yes,
the
yes.
message of the
Do you mean me or the,
No,
the film?
youth of the time and musicians of the time. So they stand against war, against this mess, and against elite culture as well. And they stand for peace. They stand for beauty, like just to see beauty and not to be instrumental.
In destroying it.
Like yes, and just instrumental. You know, it's like we are today very often, and not even just about profit and about personality.
Well, what's interesting is the number of times different people use the word beauty. I mean, I didn't do that deliberately. I just realised it when I was editing it. They all talk about beauty. That's what they, whatever beauty means. But I mean, they saw that as being something that they should aspire to. That there was something that was admirable. We've got to go in one direction. Let's go towards things or people that are beautiful. I mean, that's the reason we're here. Also, somebody wrote a piece about this article in The Guardian. It summarised the film by saying the point about this film, I mean this is a slight caricature, the point about this film, but this phrase is not, the point about this film is that the film director said exactly what he meant, and what's more, he really meant what he said. And I thought that was nice, I like that, I thought that was a good description.
It's good we maybe that one.
Yes, lady did. How are we doing time-wise? Is it all right? 5 minutes. I'm enjoying myself now that this computer's gone away.
Thank you very much for the film and for the words that you said. But actually, my question is now not only about the film, but you yourself, because you said you yourself you said about your plans to be the quiet academic or something like that, and that's why really for me after this film I think of this academic career. Well, how this change and when this change came that you.
Do you want to know how I got started in film?
Yeah, this is the question. Where?
All the ladies here will be offended by this story. I'm very sorry. I apologize in advance. Okay. I was at Cambridge.
Almost everyone.
I'll place a bet. £5 again. All right. I was at Cambridge, as I said, and I had a friend who was about 4 years before me, but who was at Oxford. And as you know, in the long summer holidays, students, we have to work to earn some money to pay for all those luxuries called education when we come back. And he said, what was I doing in the summer? So I said, well, I really hadn't any plans. The previous summer, I had cut butter. I worked for a chain store called Sainsbury's. Have you heard of Sainsbury's? Do you know? Well, it's a big chain store. And then you didn't get packaged butter. Me and people like me sat in the dungeons and you'd get this big block of butter and 2 wooden pats, and you had to sort of chop it like this and weigh it and then wrap it and then send it upstairs to me. So I was brilliant. I mean, I could do this and this and get it to an ounce of what it should be. Okay. But I didn't really like it because dungeons, no sunshine. So this time I thought, right, what are you suggesting? And he said, well, I've now joined the BBC, and the BBC are sending me to Salzburg in Austria to make a film about the Salzburg Festival. I made a film about the Salzburg Festival 40 years later. Strange that never see. Right, now Salzburg, as you know, is a castle and river underneath. And my job was to move the equipment. Now, in those days, we're now talking about 1964, equipment was very big, very heavy, not like these little digital cameras. God, I wish we'd had those then. But, I mean, heavy equipment. So he said on about the 3rd day, tomorrow morning I want to film up there. Can you get all the equipment up there into the castle by 8 o'clock in the morning? So I was a little younger then, but it was really hard work. So I got it in. It was a room approximately from here to there. I mean, it was that size room. So I got the equipment into the room. He didn't tell me what we were going to film. He just said, get the equipment up there. So I got the equipment up there, sitting in the corner, exhausted. And then the film crew arrived, and then some students arrived, very nice looking students. And then I was a bit stupid. I didn't realise what was going to happen. And then, then a door opened here, as close as it got. And in marched this man like this. And he came straight over to me in my corner and said, "Who are you?" So I said, "My name's Tony Palmera." And I didn't need to ask him who he was, because I knew who he was. And it was the great painter Oskar Kokoschka, who was the great painter, don't need to justify him beyond that. I couldn't speak. I mean, I remember thinking, it's Oskar Kokoschka. I mean, closer to me than you are. Okay? So then it must be an art class. So then the students are getting out there. I started drawing on it. Don't forget, at this point, I thought I was going to be an academic teaching logic. Okay? And then, as close as he is, sorry, you're much too pretty. He is to me, over there, close as you are to me, forgive me for this next bit, was without doubt the most incredibly beautiful, totally naked girl I've ever seen in my life. That's what they were sketching. And I kept thinking, Oskar Kokoschka, this incredibly beautiful girl, and I want to be an academic? Forget it. This is the future. It's absolutely true. I never thought about it until that moment, and I thought, yeah, I'm being paid for this. How are we doing time? 2 minutes. What to do? Go on, quick. Short question.
Yes, I want to ask you about the situation of Ukraine, because maybe you're familiar with that. We have
Situation of what, sir?
in Ukraine, we have war now with Russia. And
I know, I'm aware. We read about it all the time. You think we don't? We know about it anyway. We have these idiot people who are tourists. Remember the two people who did the poisoning? There is Salisbury Cathedral. There is the house of the Skripals, or was the house of the Skripals. Here are these two. Are they going to the cathedral? No, they're going this way. So they then appear on television. No, we're just tourists. Mr. Putin says, we're just tourists. Going in the wrong direction. And the reason they also wanted, they were going to Stonehenge, which is a big monument outside of Salisbury. Oh, we can't go there. There's snow underground. There's 100 photographs. There's no snow underground. Anyway, they're Russian. I think they've heard about snow. So we know about those dreadful people.
I want to continue about some of our artists, about sometimes singers, they tell us, oh, we are the artists, we want to just to show the beauty of the world, and we want to be out from politics. And so there is this question, to have or not to have, for the singers, this strong political position, how do you see?
But I mean, the answer is you can't be out from politics. You can't, you're born, you live, you die. That's called life. If you want to be out from politics, go and live on a desert island and eat crabs. And ignore the world. You can't ignore the world. We live in the world. It's our responsibility to, if you're a journalist, to write about that world, to reflect that world. And if you find things that are wrong, write about them. You can also write about beauty. I mean, we mentioned that. I mean, the number of times they talk about beauty, that's something that's their ideal. But they know that in order to achieve that, you're going to have to do a lot of other things as well. That's the point. I mean, you have to be an artist of any kind, a footballer of any kind, especially a journalist of any kind. I mean, how dare the Iranian government lock up 2 people, journalists, because they dared to criticize the regime? At least they haven't killed them. There are 3,000 people sitting in jails in Iran today, waiting to be executed. And these 2 journalists wrote about that, so they're locked up. I'm afraid if you want to be a really honest journalist, that's your future. It's easy enough to sit at home in your attic or your studio and write about it on the internet, but that's not the same thing as being there. Being there and reporting. What journalism is. Last question. Last question. Be quick. I've been taken to the airport. You can all come with me to the airport. That'd be nice.
I really want to ask you a practical question
Yes.
as a director. The people in your frames are very active, very lively, very raw, and usually I feel as soon as I pull up the camera and hit rec, people just start acting up. How do, like, I have my own things, what I do with them to make them feel comfortable. What do you do?
Ask a silly question. The first, as I said, there's so much I'd like to ask you. I mean, I really don't know where to start.
They just begin to be
No, then they think, oh, he's an idiot. We don't have to worry about him. And the number of times you have a camera right in front of someone, I'm sorry to make you but yes, you're the camera and I enter you. And the number of times it's happened to me where somebody will lean forward and say, now listen, don't tell anybody I told you this. The camera's whirring away recording me. You think, now wait a second, don't they know what it is? It's just it's just a question of being nice to them.
And do you
know,
feel
like it's. I think what I would want to say is you're making any good interview, don't misunderstand me any good, is that you're making love to somebody. You are literally making love to somebody. You're trying to get to know them. It's the equivalent of taking a very pretty girl out for dinner. So you're talking to them, you talk about all kinds of different things as a way of gaining their confidence. So hopefully the evening will end well. And as we all know, frequently the evening ends badly. But you know, the intention is to really seduce them in a way. That's your job. And then when you're seducing somebody, you know, you don't they forget about the camera. I'm really sorry you didn't hear it properly. Never mind, come to London.
Could you give us a piece of paper and we will call you?
Yeah, absolutely.
In 3 years.
3 years. 3 years? What are you waiting 3 years for?
I will call you
Thank you very,
tomorrow.
very much.